The phone goes off at 2:40 in the morning. There's a kidney 400 miles away from a donor whose heart stopped an hour ago. On the screen, the donor's age, the cause of death, a biopsy result, and how many hours the organ has already spent on ice. You have about an hour to answer. Say yes, and it might never work. And the failure will have your name on it. Say no, and the offer moves to the next name on the list, and your patient stays on dialysis. The people who die waiting for a kidney die after a median of 25 calls like this one. None of them were turned down by a villain. Level 1. Medical student. You're paying to be here. Third year, surgery rotation, transplant service. You hold the retractor and say nothing. The transplant floor is where students get sent to learn how sick a person can be and still be walking around. Pre-rounds are at 5. Your job is a column of numbers you copy off a monitor and hand to somebody more important than you, and for 6 weeks you are mostly furniture. Then one morning, they let you into the room. The kidney arrives in a plastic bag inside a cooler of ice. It's gray. It looks like something that has already failed. The surgeon puts it low in the abdomen above the hip and sews it to 2 vessels running down to the leg. About 30 minutes of stitching, most of which you can't see from where you're standing. Then the clamps come off. Blood goes into the organ, and the color changes while you're watching. Gray, then brown, then a deep pink spreading across the surface in about 4 seconds. A minute later, it starts making urine on the table. You're 26 years old and you have just watched dead tissue turn back into a working organ. In 8 months, you'll sit an exam that decides which specialties will bother to interview you. Tonight, you write 2 words in the margin of your patient list. Almost every transplant surgeon can tell you where they were standing the first time they saw this. In a national survey, 99% of them said they found the work rewarding. What you don't see from where you're standing is any of the rest of it. That cooler got to this room somehow. Somebody was awake at 3 in the morning deciding this kidney should come here instead of somewhere else. Somebody got on a plane. The specialty recruits on those 4 seconds, and it isn't working. Barely a quarter of the people who apply to transplant fellowship trained in this country. In 11 years, that will be you, in a hospital you have never seen, at 3 in the morning with a cooler. You don't know it yet. Level 2, surgical resident. $68,000. You're a surgical intern, and almost none of your job is surgery. Transplant patients are the most complicated people on any surgical floor. Their immune systems are switched off on purpose. The same drugs that keep the organ alive will damage the kidneys, push the blood sugar up, and put a tremor in their hands. So pre-rounds start at 4:40 in the morning and the work is numbers. Drug levels, creatinine, urine output. A fever that might be an infection or might be the body starting to reject the organ. Underneath all of it runs a ledger. 850 operations before the American Board of Surgery will let you sit the exam. Your first Christmas as an intern is spent in the hospital. So is your second. The transplant service doesn't get a quiet week. Organs don't arrive on a schedule and the floor stays full either way. Then, somewhere after your second or third year, you stop operating altogether. Many academic programs send their residents into a laboratory for 2 years. Your badge stops opening the operating room. Days become pipettes and spreadsheets. A lot of it studying the exact injury an organ takes inside a cooler you have still never carried. You come back rusty. And the decision arrives earlier than you'd expect. The transplant match runs in June, and it fills jobs that start in July of the following year. So you commit 13 months before the work begins, before you've ever run a service as chief. It isn't a competition. Most years, about a quarter of the transplant fellowship positions in this country go unfilled. Nobody is fighting you for this. You have to want it on the strength of 4 seconds you watched as a student. Level 3, Transplant Fellow. $94,000, year 12. Your phone doesn't have a silent setting anymore. When it goes off, it's the Organ Procurement Organization, and there's a donor 2 states away. This is the part of the job nobody outside it pictures. A great deal of transplant surgery happens in a hospital where you don't work, on a patient who is already dead. 84% of transplant surgeons fly for these trips, and you'll make about 20 of them a year. You land, get driven to a hospital you've never seen, and walk into an operating room staffed by people you've never met, with instruments you didn't choose. The operation is nothing like the one you trained for. You open the abdomen, work down to the aorta, and find the arteries. Some donors have a liver artery in an unusual place, and missing it can cost the organ before it ever leaves the building. Then heparin, then the cannula in the aorta, then the cross clamp, and cold preservation fluid replaces the blood, and someone pours a bucket of ice slush directly into the open abdomen. That's the moment the clock starts. Everything before it was warm. Everything after it is a countdown, and the organ in front of you has been dying since the clamp closed. Then there's the back table. Between the recovery and the transplant, the organ sits in a bowl of ice slush while you trim it, flush it, and rebuild whatever artery the donor was missing. A surprising share of your operating life is spent at a side table, working on an organ with no person attached to it. Graduating is a list: 50 transplants, 25 recoveries, 40 kidneys, 45 livers, 12 operations on living donors, 24 months. Every April, both years, you sit 120 questions in 3 hours, proctored by your own program director. There's no duty hour cap here. Transplant fellowship sits outside the body that writes those rules. The policy that does govern your schedule says out loud that the work is unpredictable and that limits are difficult. That's a governing body writing the unpredictability into its own rulebook. And there's a part of this nobody mentions to students. 23% of transplant surgeons have been in an accident on one of those trips. More than half can describe a near miss. Asked what drives their travel decisions, 58% said preserving the quality of the organ was the dominant consideration. 41% didn't know which insurer covered them out there. None of this is the hard part. You find that out in 2 years, on the phone, alone. Level 4, attending transplant surgeon. Year 14. You're an attending now, and tonight you're the one on call. The phone goes off at 2:40 in the morning. 14 years were preparation for the next hour, and none of it is operating. On the screen is a packet: donor age, cause of death, creatinine trend across 3 days, a biopsy result from a pathologist you will never speak to, a score putting this kidney's likely lifespan in a percentile, and the hours it has already spent cold. At the other end is a name you know. You've seen him in clinic every 3 months for 2 years. You know what he does for work and how far he drives to dialysis. The coordinator gets called back with questions: how long the donor was down, whether the urine output has held, whether anybody has looked at the other kidney yet. She reads you what she has. It is not everything you want. There is nobody above you on this call. The first time you take one of these alone, you write the donor's numbers on a scrap of paper and put it in your coat. There's no reason to keep it. It's still in there a year later. Take the kidney, and it might not wake up. It might never work at all, and he'll have had a major operation for nothing and be worse off than when he started. Your program's outcomes are published. So is your name. Turn it down, and the offer moves to the next center, and he stays on the list, and you go back to sleep. Here's what that decision looks like across a whole population. Researchers followed 180,000 people waiting for a kidney. The ones who eventually got a transplant had received a median of 14 offers. The ones who died waiting had received 25. The people who die on that list are not the ones nobody offered an organ. They're the ones who were offered organs again and again and turned down every time. And 84% of the kidneys that did get transplanted had been turned down for somebody else first, which means most of the time the organ was never the problem. Somebody decided it wasn't right for their patient. It was right for the next one. Now, the part that isn't in the job description. You're measured on the patients you transplant. Nobody counts the ones you decline. Centers whose 1-year survival numbers fall below a threshold get cited by regulators and can lose money. So every incentive in the building points one direction. At 2:40 in the morning, the safest thing you can do for your program is say no. The field's own journal has a name for what that does to the surgeons: not burnout, moral injury. Level 5 Senior Transplant Surgeon. Year 24. 10 years in attending, and your practice has two halves with nothing in common. The first half is the one you can put on a calendar. A woman comes to clinic wanting to give her brother a kidney. She's 41. She runs. Her blood pressure is perfect, and every test comes back showing a completely healthy person, which is the point and also the problem. Every other operation in your career is done on a sick person to make them better. This one is done on a well person who can only end up worse. So you spend an hour walking her through everything that could go wrong to somebody who does not need surgery. The protocol requires it, and you would do it anyway. The number is under one death per 10,000 donors, and it's a third of what it was 20 years ago. On paper, that's reassuring. It's one of the safest major operations in medicine. At 7 in the morning, with her asleep on the table and her brother 2 rooms away, you run the number again anyway. The other half of the practice can't be scheduled at all, and it never ends. This is one of the few surgical fields where the patients never really leave. You see them at 1 month, 6 months, a year, then every year after that. Their kids' names end up in your head. You find out who got married, who got a dog, who went back to work after 9 years on dialysis. There's a man who brings his daughter to every appointment. She was 4 the year he was transplanted. She's 14 now and visibly bored in your waiting room, and the fact that she's bored is the entire point. 2 decades of this, with the same people. So somewhere out on your calendar, about a decade from now, is the appointment where you tell a man you've known since he was 38 that the organ is failing. And then you put him back on the waiting list. Level 6, Surgical Director. Year 30. They hand you the program. You are accountable for a system now, and it runs whether you're in the building or not. There's a document you sign promising your center has a transplant surgeon available 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. Covering 2 programs more than 30 miles apart is not allowed. Somewhere in a file, a form names you personally as this program's primary transplant surgeon. Twice a year, you sit in a room and defend your center's survival numbers. Most of the job is meetings now, coverage schedules, a surgeon leaving for a competitor, a perfusion pump the hospital would rather not buy, a candidate at the listing meeting who is 59 and diabetic and marginal in 3 separate ways, and a room full of people waiting on your answer. You operate less every year. The younger surgeons are faster than you, which you noticed a while ago and haven't mentioned to anyone. In 2024, 29% of the kidneys recovered from donors in this country were never transplanted into anybody. A decade earlier, it was 18%. Every one of those organs was offered and offered again and turned down each time by somebody holding a phone in the middle of the night. You understand every one of those decisions. You've made hundreds of them yourself. There's a kidney your program turned down at 1 in the morning last Tuesday. It went to a center 90 miles away. Their surgeon took it, and it worked, and the man who received it will be back at his job by spring. Your patient is still on the list. The number your program is judged on is how many of your transplants are still working after a year, and there's a reliable way to protect that number. Take fewer risky organs and list fewer risky patients. Do that, and your outcomes improve, your citations go away, and your program stays open. The people it costs are on the waiting list. They're not in your denominator. Nobody audits the transplant that never happened. Once a quarter, your team goes through the organs the program turned down. It takes about an hour. Nobody in the room thinks any of the decisions were wrong. Year 32. The phone goes off at 2:40 in the morning. It's a liver this time, 4 hours out, and the packet is thinner than you'd like. All of it has been organized around a clock that starts the instant the clamp closes. For a kidney, that clock runs about a day. For a liver, the window sits between 7 and 12 hours, and every hour past that, the odds of it never working at all climb. Machines change some of that. A liver on a pump can travel more than 50% longer than one on ice and still arrive in better shape. But nothing stops at reperfusion. A kidney from a deceased donor runs a median of 11.7 years, and every organ you have ever placed is still counting down somewhere. You look at the packet for a while. Then you pick up the phone and say yes, and 4 hours away, a cooler goes into the back of a car.